let's see how we can customize how we work with type in InDesign. There are 3 panels related to typography. Just like a word processor, you can have InDesign automatically choose the correct open or closed quote automatically when you're typing. It can also apply to content that's been cut and pasted or placed, say, from Word or from other word processing applications. If you don't want these typographer's quotes to automatically appear, then deselect the option. I prefer to let InDesign do some work for me, so I'm going to re-enable Use Typographer's Quotes. You'll see several other options here. If I have a frame that's an unassigned frame and I click on it with the Type tool, this preference will automatically convert that frame to a text frame. This is very handy when using a template, or if you'd like to do some quick layout just using frames and then decide later whether it's going to be text or graphics. Many fonts, particularly OpenType fonts, contain versions for different sizes. Now these fonts may be specific to large versions or small versions, and they've been adjusted to make them more readable when large or small. InDesign can automatically choose the correct version depending on the size of your type. If you want to make that choice, all you have to do is to disable this setting. Again, I don't want to have to make that decision, and I'll allow InDesign to do some more work for me. When selecting copy, by default, if I triple click, it will select a line. In fact, InDesign will do different things depending on how you click. A single click will position the cursor where you click. A double click will select a word. When this is enabled, triple click will select the line. 4 clicks will select the entire paragraph. If you enable this setting, then any leading adjustments that you apply to just one character inside of a paragraph will apply to the entire paragraph. Most of us don't want this behavior because sometimes we have mixed font sizes inside of a paragraph and we use auto-leading. If we do this and we increase the size of a character, it will increase the size of the leading for the entire paragraph. I'll choose to leave this disabled. Another handy feature is allowing InDesign to automatically adjust the spacing when cutting and pasting words. For instance, in the phrase, "The dog went home dirty," if I want to move the word dirty to before dog, I can double-click on the word dirty, cut it, and then paste it just before the word dog. So now it says, "The dirty dog went home." If I disable this setting and then I cut and paste that word, what I'll end up with is an unbalanced spacing around the word. It's best to leave this enabled. I can also decide how big I want my font previews to be. The font menus in InDesign show me what the characters will look like when I use them. I can set that preview to small, medium, or large. The default setting is medium, but if I have a hard time seeing some characters or seeing the differences between characters, you might choose the large preview. Drag and drop text editing is very familiar to people who use word processors. By default, this is enabled in the story editor, but not in the layout view. Personally, I prefer to use drag and drop text editing both in the layout and in the story editor, so I'm going to enable this behavior. A new feature of InDesign is the Smart Text Reflow. QuarkXPress users will be familiar with this. When you place some long text into a page in InDesign, we can automatically add pages to compensate. With Smart Text Reflow enabled, you can choose to add pages to the end of the story, to the end of the section, or to the end of the document. Depending on how you're building your documents, one of these may be appropriate for you. I'm going to leave this on end of story, which is appropriate for most of the work that I do. We also have the ability to limit this behavior to text frames that exist on master pages. This allows you to predetermine where the type is going to go when you automatically add these text pages. You can also choose to preserve facing page spreads. This means that when InDesign is adding a page, depending on where that page goes, it may add 2 to compensate for the spread. You can also allow InDesign to automatically delete empty pages. This means that your document can grow and shrink according to the size of the text that's in it. Imagine editing a long story and you delete several paragraphs. This could leave you with a blank page, but if you enable Delete Empty Pages, then InDesign will automatically remove that extra page. This is a very handy feature for people who are working on longer documents that have multiple pages and perhaps span multiple chapters. Let's take a look at some of the advanced typography features. InDesign allows us to control what happens to type when we turn on superscripting and subscripting. By default, InDesign shrinks the text to 58.3% of its size, and it also shoots it up or below the baseline 33%. If we turn on small caps, then InDesign will automatically reduce those capital letters to 70% of their size. If you happen to be composing in a language that uses a non-Latin character set, for instance Arabic or Hebrew or Chinese, then you'll want to leave the input method options enabled. This will allow you to simply type on your appropriate keyboard and get inline results as opposed to having to use more complicated input methods. Let's look at our composition preferences. The highlight section allows us to see what InDesign has done to our composition on our behalf. For instance, if InDesign has substituted fonts, it will highlight these. Now this is actually a very handy feature to know where substituted fonts are. If I open up a document and I don't have the font present, InDesign is going to substitute that type. I want to know what's been substituted so that I can quickly hunt down the problem area and install the font correctly. I can also choose to turn on substituted glyphs. InDesign will automatically substitute various ligatures when we type. For instance, FF or FFL or FFI. If we'd like to see where InDesign has done that, simply enable substituted glyphs. Now I'll be able to see these substituted glyphs when I type. I can also be warned about various composition violations. There are a number of rules that we can establish later on, and we can see where those happen. For instance, if I have hyphenation and justification violations or paragraph or line keeping violations, I can see that. I can also see whether or not I'm using custom tracking or kerning. InDesign does a very good job of automatically tracking or kerning my letters, and so I'll trust InDesign. If I have concerns that I've got letters that have been kerned together too closely, I can enable this highlighting, and so I'll be able to see immediately where those changes have been applied. We also have some controls for text wrap. People who are coming from, say, Publisher or QuarkXPress will be familiar with objects that text wrap only the text that's underneath them and not on top. You can enable that behavior simply by turning on this checkbox. By default, though, text will wrap around objects regardless of the layer they're on unless they've specifically been told to restrict themselves to the layer or not to text wrap. You do have that control on an object-by-object basis, so I'm going to disable this setting to give me the flexibility to choose how I want text to wrap around objects. If you want to have that behavior like Quark or Publisher, then please go ahead and enable that setting.